Well, hello and welcome to the Destructive Impact of Quiet and Calculated Workplace Culture webinar we're hosting today. In case you haven't met, my name is Holly Foxworth. I'm a registered nurse and the marketing manager for content here at Axiom. I'm also joined by the dream team. I have both Dara Wheeler, which is our Chief Marketing Officer. We also have Dr. Les Kertay, which is Senior VP of Behavioral Health Services. So I'll let you meet them shortly. Few quick mentions before we get started. The one big one is that around this time last year, some of you may remember that we hosted our first summit, virtual summit, and it was such a success that we've decided to do it yet again this year. But we're going to do it, whereas last year it was about OSHA. This one, it's actually called All the Right Moves, and it's talking about really centering around modernizing mental health education, accessibility, what that looks like, everything that would be involved in that. So we're going to have 7 different 30-minute fast break sessions. Again, it's going to be virtual. It's free. It's open to any and everybody that wants to participate. The way that you would get access to that would actually be in that top right-hand corner, but it's a little bit different today. So let me tell you what you would be looking at. Normally, you just press that register now button, and that would get you registered for it, and you wouldn't have to do anything. This one's a little bit different since we have the 7 sessions. So you click on that link that says register now. That should bring you up to a web page that would have each of the individual sessions. So you can just click that select all box. It should be on the left-hand side of your screen. And so that would get you signed up for all of the individual sessions. And then if you decided that there were some that you wanted to attend more so than the others, you would at least have access to those and get the recording. So we're really excited. The keynote speaker, her name is Natasha Bowman. In case you haven't heard of her, her story is really dynamic. She was an executive, and she has a law degree, and she talks about what her experience was. And she was actually diagnosed with diagnosis being bipolar, and then also she had several suicidal episodes. And so she really was going to be able to talk us through what that was like on her end and really frame that conversation, open some of those discussion points so that we can talk about many things that are kind of hard to speak about sometimes, and that there's a lot of stigma around those. So if you'd like to attend, again, you'll see some more information about that. But if you will please, Dara, did you say that you couldn't hear me?
No, Holly, I think you're good.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I think you're good.
Okay.
Keep going.
All right. Good deal then. All right. Well, I hope you guys got all of that. I think that was probably a mouthful that I just laid all over you everywhere. But anyways, the summit, we're really excited about it. It's a half-day session. It'll start at 10 a.m. Central, and that's to accommodate both coasts, and nobody has to get up in the wee hours where it's still dark outside. It'll go half day, and there's a lot of different sessions that would be included in that. So in addition to that, the regular notes of where it is that you can find your copies of the slides, et cetera, can be located right there on the right-hand side at the bottom of your screen. And we always like your questions. So before we get started, let me go ahead and have Dr. Les, if you want to go first, and then we'll have Dara follow with some introductions, and then we'll jump right in.
Sure. Thanks, Holly. So as Holly said, I'm a Senior VP for Behavioral Health here at Axiom. I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and have had the privilege, really, of coming here to Axiom to help build behavioral health solutions with the rest of the team. That's been one of the best things I ever did. So I'm excited to be here. Thanks.
That's awesome. Dara?
Thank you, Holly. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I think I got my audio stuff figured out. Awesome. My name is Dara Wheeler. I'm Axiom's Chief Marketing Officer. This is my 16th year with Axiom, and it's been a really exciting time for us bringing some conversation around mental and behavioral health in the workplace, because there is such a need, and I am really excited about this discussion today. Thank you, Holly.
You bet. So just to kind of frame up what it is that we're going to go through and kind of give you some ideas of where we're taking this conversation. You might have noticed in the promotional material that we'd sent out in kind of the description that we wanted this to be different. We listed this as a fireside chat, and meaning that around every corner that you turn, it feels like that you're hearing this term quiet that's being thrown out, whether that's quiet quitting, whether it's quiet firing. Everything is quiet. You're hearing this coined phrase. And so we don't think that that's where we need to be. We need to talk about these things and figure out what's going on. We don't have all the answers. And as magical as Dr. Les Kertay is, I'm not aware of a magic wand that he has that you can just wave and automatically just add water and have some kind of Disneyland workplace experience, whereas some utopia there. We have to open up these conversations and start that dialogue of what's going on, because in the end, we all have, whether you're in an entry-level position all the way up to an executive, we all have many of the same shared needs, which are to be heard and to be accepted and to have the ability to take care of our responsibilities, whether that's, young parents or a single mom, or whether that's you're looking towards retirement, you're taking care of your aging parents, et cetera. There's a lot of things that people have on the plate. And so we need to find a way that we can bring all of these things to the surface and catch and figure out what's going on. We don't have all the answers, but we can tell you that there is something that's going on. We need to know what it is and why that's occurring, and then we can get to the part about how it is that we fix it. Dr. Les, I kind of took you down the rabbit hole last night whenever I was digging through some of these numbers. And the three of us, Dara, you were up looking at them as well, but they got my attention, and I wanted to ask if you would kind of go through some of these and talk through why there's such a discrepancy in what we're seeing and what's actually going on.
Yeah, well, it was really interesting because the question that you raised when you saw this, Holly found this. This is from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's a really recent report. It's less than a month old. And it talked about this decrease in productivity, a decrease in output across all industry segments, with more hours worked and, higher cost per unit of productivity. And you raised the question, which I think is reasonable. When you look at this number, it's like all of a sudden there's this drop off. Is this burnout? Is this people are, is this part of what we're seeing in the work across the workplace? And digging into on the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, there's this other chart that shows that since 2012, this numbers have been going up dramatically, meaning that fewer people are working, are getting more done, right? With this really long tail for over the last 10 years. Of course, in 2020 with COVID, it drops off precipitously and then it bounces back really hard. So this decline is real, but it's at the tail end of a really long increase. And that makes me wonder if, some of what we're seeing in the workplace is that we've been pushing harder and harder, producing more and more with fewer people. And it's just really put a strain on the system. And I wonder if instead of this being, a sign of burnout, if what we're really seeing in this big long trend is part of the cause. That we've been pushing harder and harder. And it's really, really dramatic. We don't have that graph here, but it's really dramatic when you look at, there's this huge drop in 2020 with COVID, which is certainly understandable. But then the bounce back is even steeper. And it's like we turned on a dime. So I think all of that points to some really important things that have been going on that have impacted everybody in the workplace. It also kind of plays into the narrative that we've been talking about for a while, which is that, this like increase in mental health symptoms, increase in reported stress, workers being stressed in the workplace, this has been going on a long time. this is not just since COVID. It's not just about COVID. What COVID's done for us in some ways, what the pandemic did for us, is give us an opportunity to talk about it, because now we're really aware of it. It was a real lesson in, okay, those are interesting numbers, but what's the context for them?
Yeah. So what's next? So what do we do about it?
Right. Right. What do we do? Because the answers are really different. Right.
And I also think that, from an individual basis, of course, these numbers are aggregated across the population, but I do think if you think about all of our own individual experiences in the last 2.5-3 years, I also wonder if part of this is kind of a stacking effect of when we were in a crisis, we all just kind of stacked on because it was survival for everybody. And now we're seeing some course correction post-survival mode. And I know we've had other experts on from an epidemiology standpoint or sociology standpoint saying that we're going to feel the effects of this for many, many years, and we don't quite even yet know what those effects will be. So we can theorize about these numbers and the graphs and what they're telling us, but I think the story's still to be told. There's still a lot here, and I also wonder how much of it is the experience of putting our head down and kind of stacking behaviors and things on top of each other, and now we're seeing some downstream effect of that a couple of years later.
Right. That's a great
Definitely.
point.
And those numbers, you also brought up a point, Dara, about when we were talking about the difference in how we were all remote, and then how some have gone back to a hybrid model. How do you feel like that has impacted some of these? Do you think that there could be an impact on some of these numbers based on that practice?
Yeah. Absolutely. There's a lot of organizational psychologists and other researchers out there really digging in, because we essentially had the best experiment you could put together in the last couple of years when you look at productivity and the experience of working from home versus working in an office. We've had a natural experiment occur, and I think that for those in economists and psychology, these kind of natural experiments tell us so much, and the volume of experimenter or of the people participating in the experiment is so large, because it was essentially all of us. Of course, there were exceptions to that with critical infrastructure and people on front lines having to work. But when you think about the existence today, I can even tell you anecdotally about Axiom. We were fully in office prior to 2020. The theory was we were a growing and changing organization, and we all had to be collaborating in a space. And then as soon as lockdown occurred, we all went immediately remote. And we've told the story, everybody's heard similar stories, and we found that we were very successful going remote and didn't lose a whole lot of collaboration and productivity by going remote. Now, of course, certain tasks are better at work in a shared space versus at home and remote. But overall, that these changes are going to shift the way we work pretty significantly. And I do think, again, kind of we don't know yet what that fully looks like, although I think research has shown that hybrid models really are the best way to go. But there's a lot of theories around what kind of hybrid, what days you should be at work. And I do think that what I've at least some of the initial research has shown that if you go that route where you go hybrid, the whole organization has to kind of buy into that model and all be in the office the same Wednesdays, so that they all get the benefit of being at the office those same Wednesdays. So again, we're early days of kind of coming back into the workplace and understanding how this model has shifted. But I know that there are a lot of, and I know we'll talk a little bit more about this, when you look at the differences between people that really want to be fully back in the office versus those that want to stay remote or some version of that, then there's going to have to be a balance on what type of employee populations we've got and how to deal with that. So if you've got somebody that really enjoys staying remote, but then now you're forcing them to be in the office, maybe they're not as productive. Maybe they're more stressed and not as happy. So I think we're going to have to think through the downstream effects of some of these changes. I'll pause there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And Dr. Kertay, do you feel like that this is where I know we've talked about it 97,000 bajillion quadrillion times, but it's like this is where that term, that work-life balance, that's where we're falling off. It's like we don't know where to put that line between working your personal life and your work life, and being able to separate those two.
Yeah, I mean, I think to some extent the idea of work-life balance has been mythical all along. We've all been striving for some sort of reasonable life balance. I think, certainly all of that got totally upended during the pandemic for a lot of people. Not, again, as Dara said, not for everybody, but for a lot of people. A lot of us found ourselves suddenly at home dealing with kids who were home from school, other kinds of pressures, trying to manage all of that. I think one of the things, I've been fortunate enough to be working from home for quite some time, right? So I've had to make adjustments for how do I have a work life that has boundaries around it, so that I'm not just working constantly. Right. I think that those are, and I had some time to develop some of those skills, and, I had the good sense to have an office on which I can close the door and I don't come back in here. Right. Yeah. Not everybody's got that. And a lot of us got thrown into this. So I think there are a lot of challenges around this. There always have been. And now we are really faced with this. We're fully electronic. Everybody's interconnected all of the time. I did an experiment once where I put my phone on the other side of the bedroom at night so that I didn't pick it up first thing in the morning. And the first few mornings, it was like flat out panic. It's like, I mean, that's a real indication of the culture that we have. It's not just it's work. We're interconnected constantly. That creates a lot of strain, I think, that we're really seeing right now.
You even see that, I'm sure you guys have seen it as well, but even if you look at the new trends in how houses are being developed, everything used to always be an open concept. And then it's like post-pandemic or after we left our offices, what became our bedrooms or our kitchen tables, et cetera, that all of a sudden now we want some boundaries, we want some walls to go up again. And I guess that is for that very reason that there's a difference in space and being able to separate things there.
Sure.
Yeah. So talk to us then about how this relates to connecting all of these individual pieces, because I think that's where we're dropping the ball. It's like we have these conversations, but it's like they're these big grandiose, so we need to do this, that, and the other. But what does it really come down to, and what's really at stake here if you have these quiet and calculated workplace cultures that are there? Is it really something that is going to impact your brand? Is it going to impact your career? Is it different for the different generations? Talk us through how all of those things work within this connected circle.
Well, the first place to start is with something that Dara said, which is that we are living in a giant uncontrolled experiment.
Amen.
And we're all the guinea pigs, and so we don't know the answers to some of these questions, to a lot of them. We do know some things. We know that employees who are highly stressed and not highly engaged in work we're going to have more turnover. We're going to have more injuries on the job. We're going to have higher healthcare costs. We do know all of those things, that there is that relationship. There's an interesting relationship between job satisfaction, sort of happy employees, and engagement, we realized at a certain point, 15, 20 years ago, that if we measure job satisfaction alone, it doesn't really predict productivity by itself. So we stopped measuring job satisfaction and started only measuring engagement, which is usually really about discretionary effort, like how hard am I willing to work? Those are the engagement questions. Well, we lost sight of, okay, but I have to have some enjoyment as well. I have to have a life. There's both things working. So all of those, this circle is really a good one. When we have people who are highly stressed, unhappy, they tend to disengage. When they disengage, we're not paying attention as well. Injuries are going to go up, turnover goes up, and those are all very expensive propositions for employers.
Absolutely. I think that we pulled some stats that were here that we can kind of go through, but I did want to ask the audience that's here, have you gone back to a regular workforce? Are you back in an actual facility? Are you still working from home? What are the challenges that you guys feel like that you're encountering in your individual organization? This is all about shared learning and shared experiences. So if there's something that you have that you want to share, please feel free to put that there in the chat box, and we will bring that up and discuss it and answer any questions that are there. But Dara, do you want to talk about some of these numbers, the polls and stats that came through with that?
Yeah, and I was going to remind the audience too, please ask questions, jump in. Like Holly said, we really want to make this a conversation. What are you experiencing? Any questions that you have or things you're thinking about? And, these numbers are interesting and stark, but I think the whole point when we talk about this quiet culture, these passive-aggressive moments, I started thinking about it more broadly because I don't know that quiet quitting is a new thing, and I think there's just some rebranding and some renaming of these different moments that we've got as employee-employer relationships. And quiet quitting, quiet firing, all of these things have existed before. And what I do think we're seeing, though, is kind of a shift just in general from a cultural standpoint of being able to distance ourselves. One of the challenges with being remote is there is a physical distance here. And it is easier to get a little bit more passive or passive aggressive in your communication because it's a very different style of communication. I might not be physically standing in front of my coworker having conversations. And so sometimes it's easier just to type something out instead of picking up the phone call. And you have to be very thoughtful about what means of communication you use with your teams and your groups, because it really matters. And when we think about this, it makes sense that as we've gone remote or then maybe come back, but maybe there's challenges to coming back, that people are struggling. And again, I keep thinking of the stacking of these effects, that at a certain point, our brains are just tired of change. We're all a little bit fatigued of the events of so many things have happened in a short period of time that processing that for us, my little brain just stops kind of processing it. And so at a certain point, you're just kind of drained. And I see somebody kind of following up about my passive aggressive comment. And when we think about engaging culture and these comments about emotionally detached or actively disengaged, if we were having regular discussions and sometimes blunt, sometimes hard, sometimes difficult discussions, either as a leader or as an employee, and saying, hey, I'm struggling, or hey, this isn't fulfilling for me, or I'm struggling to complete my job because I'm being asked to do too many things in a given time frame. These type of conversations are direct conversations. But if you're in a situation where you've encouraged passive and or sometimes passive aggressive work styles or cultures, and in some ways the technology that we've had over the last few years increase with social media and various things have fostered some of this. It is really easy to see that people are having a hard time having some of those direct conversations. You see it, I see it with my children. It's more difficult having the conversation behind a screen with an anonymous group becomes easier. So that's what I kind of mean by passive aggressive. And I think in general, some of these things have existed for a long time. They just we may be more aware of it, or maybe kind of rebranding it a little bit, or maybe there's some power dynamics here that are shifting in terms of labor force and employers and the contract between the two. So I said a whole lot. I'll pause. Les, what do you think?
No, I think it's really interesting, that question about, like, is it passive aggressive? I think that's part of the problem with this conversation about, quote unquote, quiet quitting or a quiet firing. Some of it probably is aggressive. Like, I'm angry and I don't have enough power, and so I'm going to play that out by producing as little as I can get away with. That's passive aggressive, right? I'm exercising my power in the only way that I can. I think there are other reasons for doing this. I mean, sometimes it might just be a conscious decision. I've been knocking myself out. I've been killing myself, and I can only do so much.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to back off a little bit because I need to take care of myself. That's maybe, it's almost the opposite. It's like active. It's not aggressive, and it's an active decision to slow down. And we can't. I think we have a tendency to label something and then think that we understand it, and we can throw a one size fits all solution at it.
Yeah.
That's the hard part with a remote workforce that I learned, quite a while ago when I was managing remote teams, is that, you have to really work extra hard at making those connections with people, and they're individual. No two people on a team are exactly the same, and we have to stop acting like that. That's part of what's happened here, is that we've kind of gotten a little bit dehumanized, I think, because we're treating everyone as if they're a monolith.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I know we've had some questions about that, but I think generally that's kind of like what we like to do. We like buckets and we like categories. And I of course, we're marketers on Holly and my side, and we love categories and buckets. And I think a lot of this becomes kind of just ways of putting or trying to make sense of the world we're experiencing. But it doesn't always, you're right, it doesn't always fit, or doesn't fit the person we're talking to. And so it doesn't really give us, again, I always come back to the what next, what then. Well, what do we do with that?
Right.
Yeah.
Somebody tell me what to do with all these terms and things. But I know Holly is anxious to get to some of these questions.
We turned the water faucet on, and they are flowing now. But there have been some really good ones. Thanks to everybody that was sharing whether they had gone back to the office. Looks like some have done a hybrid, some have gone back completely, some are happy, some maybe not so much. I did see on here, let's see, the first one was, have we found any particular role or responsibility that has a higher quiet quitting effect?
I haven't seen anything that would suggest that we know enough to see a pattern. I think this is played out at pretty much every level. But again, I want to underline something that you said, Dara, that this is not a new phenomenon. This didn't suddenly just happen overnight. I mean, we've seen this before, and we've seen it all along. But now we've got a label for it. That's what happens when you have, 150 million people in an uncontrolled experiment. We try to come up with ideas that will encapsulate really complicated issues. But to directly answer that question, I don't think we know enough to have seen that it's happening at one level over another. Unless you've seen something, either of you have seen something that I haven't.
No, I think it's equal opportunity in that area for sure. Yeah. Stephanie brought up a good one about physicians are experiencing higher workloads with secure messaging, creating some work-life balance that existed before COVID, but now it's much worse from the physician perspective. That technology was great, but now they're on the computer more, they're interacting less in person and in teams, less likely to build some of those relationships within that makes it challenging. I was asking about any thoughts about employers, what employers could do to support more of their staff, and in this particular case, the physicians. This is an excellent question.
It's a great question, and I don't think that there are simple answers for it. I think that there's a series of answers. One is that we have to recognize that there's a limit to how much work an individual can do and remain effective. And that's certainly true for physicians across all of healthcare. That's really true. I mean, there's a limit to the amount of efficiency we can squeeze out of an individual before we start to lose effectiveness. And I think that we're there, and that there are two things going on that I think have really impacted healthcare. One started before COVID and got exacerbated, I think, which is, electronic medical records are a great idea, and the execution has really ended up with physicians taking the brunt of a lot of extra documentation. That takes a huge amount of time. And when are you going to do that? If you can't do it while you're with the patient, then you got to do it afterwards. This secure messaging is something that patients love. I love being able to text my physician. But you know what? If I'm on the other end of that, that's, getting a text at 2:00 in the morning, not an easy thing to deal with. I think we have to really rethink the entire way that we treat healthcare workers, including but not limited to physicians, and we have to rethink staffing models to reflect the reality of what we're asking people to do. On top of which, so many physicians and nurses, all kinds of healthcare workers were really beat up during the pandemic. It was just a huge amount of work. It was a heavy lift for everybody.
Yeah, to the point about whether we're seeing any level or role of responsibility that has a higher quitting effect, probably not yet, but we definitely have seen industries that are very affected by the last few years, like teaching and healthcare. And I think the point about rethinking, since we're in this uncontrolled experiment, we need to start taking this data and rethinking our models that we've kind of just existed with for a long time. Like Les said, the unintended consequences of an EMR and technology system, which is less human interaction, which we all know human connection is how we best function in this world we live in.
Yeah. So moving to then kind of some of these disengagement things, there was two questions that look like Don might put in here that really relate to this. And so as we kind of transition to that topic, one of them had said, do you feel like it's fair for employers to ask employees to go above and beyond while treating them and paying them poorly? And then the second was that said that now it feels like the tables have turned. And because of that, some of the employees no longer feel like that they want to go above and beyond for the employer because they're exhausted. I
mean, what can you what can we say to that? To the question, do I feel like it's fair? It occurs to me to answer that in a little different way, which is that I would say that it's not smart. It's not only potentially unfair, but it's also a poor business decision to treat people badly, underpay them and then expect them to do more at a time when everybody is highly stressed, right? We need to find ways to, as employers, we need to find ways to deliver more value to our employees, whether that's work-life balance, better pay, better balanced demands. All of those things are part of the solution here. And I think it's really important. It's not just that it's bad for the employees, it's bad for employers when this dynamic is playing out.
Yeah, it's totally bad business. So it's not only does it maybe not the right thing or unfair, but it's really just bad business. And I just want to kind of reiterate some of this stuff. It's kicking back around because of what we've gone through, but this is not new in that I feel like a few years ago, I was in a conversation with a bunch of business executives, and they were all bemoaning the millennial generation. All of those millennials, there's no loyalty. They bounce between jobs yearly, every other year. And as organizations, we're not necessarily loyal either. The contract between employee and employer has really changed. We used to, couple generations prior, actually have things like, protection under retirement and, different things like that, where you would stay with an organization your entire career because you had a whole retirement process, and I'm blanking on the term because it doesn't apply. A pension, pension, because I couldn't even think of it because nobody does it anymore. So you had this whole pension experience, and there's a contract there. So you're buying an employee's loyalty for this pension, and when we move away from that, it makes sense that the contract has changed. So when that contract changes, as employers, Les is exactly right. We need to think about incentivizing employees differently and how to support them in a different way, which isn't going to be a pension in exchange for loyalty. And then vice versa, how does an employee feel like they're getting something out of the organization? And this is a conversation that has kind of kicked around a little bit. That's why when we look at, as generations come into the workforce, what are their values? Do they value longevity in a workplace, or do they value additional education or flexibility? And flexibility, I think, is another word that gets thrown around a lot without a real understanding. Flexibility doesn't mean being able to do whatever you want, but flexibility means being able to maybe come into the office 1 or 2 days a week versus 5 days a week. Or there's a lot of articles going around right now about a 4-day work week, and shifting our models and understanding about what really works. And I think that's the piece that I keep coming back to.
And the 4-day work week, before somebody asks, the 4-day work week might work, but not if we expect people to do 5 days worth of work in 4 days.
Oh,
if the hours keep stretching,
right.
if the hours keep stretching, and it's hard to do that 4-day work week when the rest of the organization's on a 5-day, and all of a sudden those Friday people that aren't showing, you're going, oh, we have all these Friday things to get done. So
Les, you'd brought up before something about, we were talking about employees in a prior event about, how it was so important that we prioritize, that we make sure that they're able to take their time off and step away, et cetera. And it does feel like that we've done a very good job of that, of, we're making progress in that area of making time, saying yes, the flexibility that Dara referenced of yes, we have more flexibility. Yes, we can do things differently, et cetera. But you brought up a really good point, and that was that the workload that's there. If you're going on vacation, but then you're having to twice as hard before you leave and twice as hard when you get back, is that really a vacation? And how it is that you get around that? For me, whenever I was, at the bedside as a nurse, then, you're on an hourly, type of event there. And if you're not working a shift, somebody else is going to come in and cover that. You're going to find somebody that covers that. However, whenever you're not in that type of an environment where it's, shift work type of scenario, and you're responsible for a process or whatever. I'm blanking for a word, the process, the responsibilities, I guess I'm trying to say, there. So it's, there's a question of how it is that you backfill that. Where do you find those resources, or what does that look like? And I don't know that we have any of those answers just yet.
Yeah. It's, one of the solutions that we've heard, for example, is, people are giving additional mental health days, which is great. But if the first question on my day of the morning, the day after a mental health day is, what have you done for me lately? Yeah. I'm not going to feel very well rested. So I think that, and I know that we keep saying this, but I think we have to have a programmatic understanding of our workers, who they are, both generationally and individually. Every time we look at generational differences, what we see is that there's much greater intra-generational variability than there's a lot more variation within a generation than between generations. We cannot keep treating people as if they're monolithic.
Totally agree. And I even made the point with one of my executive teams saying that some of the younger generation that we complain about sometimes, that I was hearing complaints about, are so efficient at getting work done because they have a life that they're committed to outside of the workplace. They're not somebody, yes, they love their job and they love what they do, but that's just a piece of their day. That's not their whole day. And so there's a real incentive to complete the work timely so that they could go on to the rest of their life. And I laugh because, the old saying, if you want something done, give it to a working mother, but it's, it's always kind of a snarky comment. But I have found even myself very efficient and effective when I've been my busiest, because if I have to get something done, I know I have this short window to complete it. Now, lots of people are very busy lives besides working mothers, but it is something that I always think of as a kind of a facetious, but sometimes it's true. If you have only so many hours, you have to get something completed.
Right.
Yeah. Victoria had mentioned just kind of the statement here, but what she was saying, unmanageable workload and deadline-driven work is causing a very challenging environment. You can pay and acknowledge support, but those things that are beyond the employer control, but nature of the work. So it said social service, working with high-risk youth and struggling with workforce retention and hiring is very tough to manage. You are exactly right. Exactly right.
And we have to stop. One of the things, we're ending up talking a lot about healthcare workers here. It seems like I'm guessing that there's a lot of people in the audience in that category. We have to stop treating care provision as if it's a widget.
Yes.
We just cannot. We can't apply those same principles. It's not an assembly line. It's bad enough to treat an assembly line worker poorly. On top of that, if you are treating a kind of work that is necessarily complex and interpersonal as if it were assembly of a unit, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
We've been seeing that for quite a while, actually.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the pieces I did want to mention here that was on the slide for this one in particular that I did want to go through was the one about unclear communication. That jumps out at me the most. Darren and I have worked together for years and years and years, and she'll tell you as well that we both have very different styles, but I feel like it's my job to take as many things from her, to off of her plate so that it doesn't, bog her down. Sometimes when those wires are not, we don't communicate directly one-on-one, then I may be in a totally different direction and thinking that's where she needs me to be, whereas she's somewhere else. And so I guess what I would ask then from both of you would be, what is the fix for that? How is it that we fix those things? Or do you feel like that you need to put together one-on-one sessions and that's really how you get things done? Do you make it that, managers are more accessible for a time period? What are some ideas that you think are the most effective other people in the audience might be able to use as well?
Let me throw one idea out there. I want to see what Les's response is to it. I've heard this a couple times recently, and I love the idea, is to have office hours. And, of course, Les is a professor, so office hours is standard as a professor. But I loved the concept of either department office hours or individual office hours, so that it's, hey, every week, here are my office hours. Open, show up. Who wants to talk? Who wants to chat? Ask questions. As a department, hey, marketing's office hours are Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 9 to 9:30. And if anybody has a question or needs something done or a task they need help with, then these are the office hours. I just thought that was such a cute idea to kind of steal from the academic world.
Yeah, I actually think it's a great idea. One reaction I have to that is that I remember when I first started managing teams of physicians, I would think of people coming, I was constantly being quote unquote interrupted by people coming into my office asking me questions. And after not terribly long, I realized that all those things that I thought of as interruptions were actually my job.
Your job, yeah.
Right?
The real work.
Job,
the real work.
The real work was about communicating clearly what it was that I needed for people to be doing. And I think it's a skill that we have to develop. The very best boss that I ever had was someone who could outline a project, clearly define what the boundaries were. Here's some things I really want included. Here are things that are out of bounds, and then turned me loose to do that.
Yes.
I never had the experience of creating something and saying, no, that's not what I wanted. If anybody on this call has had that experience, you know how awful that is. That's an indication of poor communication on the part of the manager. And I made it, when I realized that from that boss, I made it my job to try to get better and better at that. What is it that I need? What do I really care about? And then turn people loose and not micromanage them. Right? It's both of those skills. You can't just not micromanage by backing off. That's passive on the part of the manager that I think that creates confusion and it creates a lot of frustration. So I think we need both. We need to turn people loose, but we need to turn them loose with clear expectations.
Very true. Very true.
I also take a lesson from our illustrious CEO, who I feel like is very methodically repetitive in some of his communication. And when I first worked with him, I was like, yes, I know you've told me 5 times, but I do realize that and I did my roll my eyes like I'm 15 and okay, Dad, it's fine, I got it. But I do find that that's really critical, because you might not really be fully present, or you're thinking about the 10 other things you have to do. And that repetitive communication, saying the message over and over, is so important, because we are moving very quickly. And it happens to me all the time. It happened to me with Holly and me this week, even, where it's like, oh, you know what? I was moving too quickly. Just to be clear, here's what I mean. Here's why I mean it, and here's where we're going with it. And to continue to just kind of reiterate that over and over again is so important. And I love that lesson, Les, too. It's a great one.
100%.
And you get reminded of it over and over again.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, Dom had wrote in here. I'm the millennial who's trying to finish his work during the day so that he can live at night. I love it, though. We did have one that was from Stephanie that said, to the comment about loyalty, physician candidates do not value that pension benefit, and it's no longer a recruiting tool for the younger group. They want to be compensated now, and it said employers need to rethink the model as noted earlier, but we also need to rethink the benefit and comp package. And so she was asking, is there current research about the new challenges?
I know that there is, but it's not my area of expertise. So I unfortunately can't give a specific answer to that. Dara might be better at that. I do know that everybody is looking at it. I guess the one thing I would say is that the thing about research on groups is that it tells you about what's true statistically across a group. And I suspect that there's a lot of individual variation that gets lost, you know. You might have a 50-50 chance across a statistical pool, but for each individual, the odds are either 0 or 100. So we have to be really, really specific about how we negotiate those things.
I totally agree, and that's a great point. I think historically the data shown in the research is that compensation is effective in a short term for motivation and for bringing about kind of the productivity that you're looking for or recruitment, et cetera, but it is very much a short-term win usually. That may be shifting a little bit, and it really depends on your role and your level. That shifts the higher up you get when you're and really the higher your risk is within an organization, the more you expect to be compensated for it. So for physicians who are have a very high level of risk within their role, they do expect to be highly compensated for that risk. But there are so many things, and I know I'll embarrass Holly for a second, that you can do that really don't cost organizations a whole lot, that really make a difference, like appreciation. There's been a lot of research around just being appreciative of your teams and thanking them. And I think Holly does this better than almost anybody I've ever seen, just bringing together that level of appreciation. And it's not forced, it's not fake, it really is true appreciation. And I think that makes a big difference we're talking about culture. It does make a big difference in the culture of what an organization is trying to do.
Yeah,
that's very kind of you to say. Thank you. Let's talk about some of the fixes, because it looks like that we're down to just a few minutes. So I want to make sure that we can kind of get into some of these suggestions for how it is that we fix some of these issues. I don't know, Les, unless you purchased a magic wand while we've been sitting here again, that you have all of the answers. But it just feels like that we have to be able to treat people like humans. We have to just treat them and care for them as we would want to be treated ourselves.
Right. I mean, we've been talking about this in the context of mental health first aid, in the context of, mental health aspects of injury case management, all of those things. The most, the four most important words that I know are, how are you doing? Coupled with an attitude where you're actually interested in the answer. I think that human touch is probably the most important thing that we need to get better at. We've lost sight of it a little bit with all of this focus on efficiency, and it doesn't take that long. The fact of the matter is that, you know what, might take me 10 minutes to have a conversation with somebody if I ask them how they're doing and we have a real conversation about that. I promise you'll get every minute of that 10 minutes back double.
Yes.
If you're really having that conversation with people who report to you, but also just with colleagues. I mean, it makes a big difference.
I think the other piece, a lot of people, when you ask that question, sometimes you don't want to burden the other person with your
Right.
true answer, your response. I heard somebody say recently, and I've thought just repeatedly about this the last couple of weeks. We often underestimate the amount people are willing to help us or wanting to help us. And whether you have a mentor that you're looking towards and it's hard to ask for that mentor to help you with something, or if you're a new mom who needs help and wants somebody to help you come over and clean your kitchen, I think we're really reluctant to ask for that help. But I think we forget that it actually probably gives the other person more than it even gives you. And so even that 10 minutes, yes, it might help the employee, but as the leader or the manager or the coworker, it might actually help you more than it helped the person who gives you some, yeah, my day's not that great. You might actually find out that you get more benefit than they even do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Something about the list here, Holly, that I think is interesting is that I think all of these are really good principles. And I think each of them, we have to understand that they are individualized. I know that's a theme that I keep coming back to, but, giving recognition when it's earned, but giving recognition that feels like recognition. Some people love to be called out in a meeting publicly. Some people are terribly embarrassed by that and don't, that doesn't feel like recognition. That feels like an extra burden. That feels like embarrassment. Creating purpose in work is, my purpose in work is probably different than other people's. It's different than it was 10 years ago. We change over time, all of that. But all of these principles are really based on, we need to get back to some basic principles of interpersonal interaction. People are going to think that I'm, kind of like Pollyanna and I'm going to cost companies efficiency. I'm actually promising that I'll increase effectiveness.
Unless I think we skipped over this question, and if we didn't, I think it bears repeating. Do you think the need to kind of shift back to focus on culture was going to happen either way? Or do you think it was inevitable after the pandemic and kind of going remote and questioning what we're doing here?
That's a really good question. I saw that go by, and I don't know that we know the answer, but I suspect that it was a reckoning that was going to happen sooner or later. And like a great many things, it got accelerated by the pandemic. In the same way that mental health, increasing reports of mental health symptoms and higher levels of diagnoses has been going on for quite some time. Suicide rates have been going up for quite some time. The pandemic accelerated those trends and also pointed them out. So I think we're probably seeing the same thing in terms of this reckoning around culture. I think it got accelerated and it made us look at it. And that in the long run will turn out to be a good thing, I think.
I agree.
As hard as it is to say that, I think it will turn out to be a good thing.
One place where I think we're seeing this even more so on a broader scale is where you look at social media. It's like, you have all the different social media channels that are there. We all have the Facebooks, the Instagrams, et cetera. But you saw that there was TikTok and it just took off and it's just exceeded so much higher than the other platforms. And I'm convinced that it's because it's real. It's real. It's people where it's stripped down. You're not putting on a performance. You're coming there and it's real information. We'll see. We'll see what it does there. And I know I haven't convinced you completely on the TikTok scale, but I think that it's in the broader picture. I think that that's what people are looking for, is a place to go where they can be themselves. Yeah. Well, guys, we are at time right here. Thank you so much for joining us. And I thank all of you for your questions. You have no idea how much we appreciate and we value your input and the suggestions that you give us and telling us your feedback, because it drives us in the directions of where we need to go. We're not always driving. We see this as a partnership, and you guys are the second passenger seat of that. So we really appreciate all of your efforts and your participation. So before we wrap up, if you haven't already, just one more last reminder that we do have the summit that's going to be coming up, and I appreciate all of you. And we have the summit. Have a good day.
Thanks.